Bismillah. So I thought I'd ask you, because it's the 31st of December, do you care about the fact that it's the 31st of December?
No, not particularly. Let me try and think.
Mm.
Is there any element of care in my mind right now? Not particularly, no. No.
I mean, I don't see you as someone who does like goal setting and these types of things. So you don't have any kind of New Year process, right?
No, not really. I'm a kind of guy that I fall off stuff a lot, like plans and goals, but I get back on very quickly. Like it's not speaking to my wife about this is like a lot of people kind of if they don't achieve their goal by a set period of time or they fail at something, they kind of just give up, maybe, and then they go. But I've had, I've had stuff that I've been trying to do for years, and I might like slack here and there, but I'll just get back on it without really guilt tripping myself about it too much, which is, I think, it's a good trait, alhamdulillah. But whether I achieve all of my goals is a different question, really.
Mhm.
But I haven't got like a by this. I feel like that's a lot. A lot of that is a procrastination to set like, in this year, why wait till tomorrow when I could just start now? Like
Yeah.
30th of December or whatever it may be. It was like that. I had a few weeks of being quite sick. Like I'm still trying to get out of it, but
Mm.
with the gymnasium, like a lot of people go to the gymnasium on the 1st of January, and that's like the New Year kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I was looking at because Christmas shut over certain Christmas periods. I had a look yesterday, and I realized they were open on New Year's Day. So in my head, I was thinking, oh, I was gonna wait until they're reopened, but they actually opened a bit earlier. And I thought, okay, the reason they're opening on New Year's Day is because that's when everybody kind of wants to go, right?
Right.
I went last night. I felt better enough to start going again. I went last night and it was completely empty. And I'm thinking, I wonder if it's empty because everyone's got this whole, oh, I'm going to wait till New Year's kind of thing. All right. So yeah, that was just a little observation, I suppose. But what about you?
Yeah.
Do you pay any mind?
Assalamu alaikum. A few years ago, the conversation about masculinity and Islam popped up. And of course, I took a big interest in that. And some of you might know that I actually wrote a whole book on Islamic masculinity. I went to the Quran, I went to the Sunnah, I filtered out the red pill, I filtered out the feminism, and I came down to what a good Muslim man looks like. It's a really good book with tons of stories and examples from the Sahaba, from the Prophet ﷺ, from the other prophets of how to be a good Muslim man. It's entertaining, it's not too long, and I'm offering you the free first chapter. If you click the description below, then I will send that over to you. And then if you want to get the full book, you can get the full book. We also have the audio version. So check it out. See you around. It's called The Shepherd's Way. Well, I always avoided the whole Gregorian calendar thing. I just thought, like, what I tend to do is I see a new year as starting at the end of Ramadan. That's just how I kind of saw it. So, yeah, maybe it's because in Ramadan I make a lot of dua for the kind of goals that I have and that I want to achieve. So maybe that's what triggered. It's yeah, Ramadan's a bit of a time of reflection as well.
Mm.
So I think that's why. And your lifestyle, your whole lifestyle changes for that month, right? So it does feel like after Ramadan, it's a new thing, whatever it is, whether it's a new year or a new phase or whatever, you know what I mean? So that's why I always saw it like that. Like my new year begins after Ramadan. So I don't even follow the Hijri calendar in terms of, the new year in that sense, but it just ends up being Ramadan. Yeah. You know, I don't actually know. I'm not in touch with people enough to know whether the average Muslim, like let's say living in the West, sees things like this in terms of, oh, it's a new year. Okay, let me set my goals, this and that. From a marketing point of view, I was always like tempted to kind of use that as a thing. Like, okay, if that's what's on people's minds, then I'll use it, even though I was reluctant, like, because I don't believe in that. Like, I prefer not to use the Gregorian calendar more than needed. But yeah, I'm not really sure if people use it. But I think if you want to achieve goals, it's always important to have some sort of deadline, whether that's a year deadline, a 3 year deadline, a 3 month deadline. Otherwise, you kind of take it too easy and stuff like that. But I was
Mm.
reading, it was a few months ago actually, I read the book by Muhammad Faris, The Barakah Effect. And it's really good actually. It covers the concept of barakah in detail. Like imagine a whole book, like a decent length book, all about barakah, and obviously the methods of increasing the barakah in your life. And some of the methods are as simple as starting things with Bismillah, and then some things are, for example, he talks about the concept of the gardener mindset versus the carpenter mindset. And he's saying that the Muslim should have the gardener mindset, where they're more focused on the just the actions, the good intentions, renewing their intentions, and accepting what Allah gives them out of those actions, rather than being extremely focused on a specific outcome. It's like you have a good intention, you plan like the general direction of where you want to go with it, and then you really take put a lot of action in place, and you work hard, but then you're grateful no matter what the outcome is, and you kind of are very flexible and open to Allah sending you down different paths. Whereas the carpenter is more rigid and more focused on specific goals and specific numbers and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. I actually recommend that book. I think it's a good book. And barakah is, it's what everyone's looking for these days anyway, which is to get more out of less, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, good book. And yeah, so we can plan our goals in a more flexible way, perhaps more of a direction. But I would, where it makes sense, I would still put numbers to goals in order to determine the level of action I take, right? So if you want to make 50K versus 350K, you're going to probably have to do different actions. So, you kind of have to think about the goal and the amount in order to know like kind of how hard to work or how much to focus on it or whatever.
I do have like weekly things, maybe. I think maybe I look at things by week as opposed to by year or by month or something like that. I don't really tend to look any longer than that. Like I might say, okay, coming up to Monday, let me start fresh on Monday or whatever. That could be with anything. But I feel like lately I've been really self aware of my own mortality, to be honest. Not to get too deep, but like I'll just, yeah, more than usual. These last few months, actually, I'm not really sure what keeps setting it off, but like just realizing how fragile life is, I guess. And because of that, I don't get too invested into these long term aspirations without thinking, well, how important is that compared to what I need to do right now in terms of, my deen and the dunya that I'll be questioned about. So there is a lot of that going on in my mind, at least. Because ultimately it is so unpredictable, isn't it? It's so, you've seen all these plane crashes, for example. Like,
Yeah.
I know that I mean, things can happen at any point. You can just have a heart attack in your bed, but I think it's the taking for granted how uncertain life is and how we have this certainty about our existence that really can just be pulled from under our feet at any moment. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
So that, yeah.
death, thinking about remembering death, it allows you to focus on taking action on what will help you, benefit you when you die, right? And the beautiful thing about, in Islam, our belief is that you could actually achieve nothing and still get huge rewards for it based on your intention and your preparation for it and your action towards it. And often, a friend of mine we often talk about history and different movements, Islamic movements in history, and how the founder of that movement very rarely saw the fruits of his work. But does that mean he doesn't get reward for it? Wow, he definitely gets reward for it. So, I think that's the cool thing about Islam is that you could be focused on your ikhlas, on your humility and your salah today. And on the same very day, you could put in an hour and a half of work towards a project that would only see the light of day in 5 years or 10 years, right? Like both. And you would actually hope from Allah to get rewarded for both today, right? Not in 5 years when that thing comes to fruition. So, actually part of the success of your projects, maybe your actual acts today, and then what happens in 5 years, that's from the tawfiq of Allah, So like, that's something to always keep in mind. The fact that you are able to, that you pray, even the fact that you pray, that is a blessing from Allah, that Allah allowed you the guidance to pray. And then if you're, let's say, trying to write a book that will benefit the world, for example, the fact that Allah will give you the permission to live long enough to finish writing the book, and then the success of that book, again, that's from the tawfiq of Allah. That's why, I remember people talking about Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, and how a lot of his works were lost,
Yeah.
and they weren't really re-brought back to light until just about 100 years ago or something. And that is actually a sign of barakah and a sign of sincerity, is that your work spreads very far and wide and over time. Likewise, the authority that Allah gives a leader in the world is based on their ikhlas and their sticking to Allah's rules and limits, and the justice that that prevails in his land under his authority. If you're an oppressor, you won't last long. If you're very just, you will last longer. So that's one of the rules as well. So subhanallah, yani, you can see things in a short term, medium term, long term way. And sometimes, yeah, you're right. Like, with death, you could think about it from so many different angles. Obviously, because I've been thinking about Syria a lot, I've been thinking about the people that die, like now, like someone who's been struggling for this all those years and they didn't die, right? Then maybe they're in very dangerous situations and they survive, and then they die now, right? Or they died the day before Damascus was taken, or something like that.
Yeah.
But none of that matters, because in the end, it's about your intentions, your actions, your sincerity, and then the reward you get from those things. It's not the fruits of the dunya per se at all, actually, at all.
It's just easy to distract yourself with like your own self-importance, I suppose, because it's that self-importance that gives you the aura that you're. I've said it before, but like you're in a movie and you're only going to have an ending that is like justified for the script, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like a movie, if the main character in the movie just died 20 minutes into the film,
Yeah,
it'd be a bit like, well, that's a crap movie, right? That doesn't
yeah,
make any sense.
yeah,
But you give
yeah,
yourself that main character's
yeah,
persona, and you think,
yeah,
well, okay, so I'm going to achieve all these goals, and then I'm going to rest my weary head, when the time feels right, and that's when I'm going to pass, when I've
yeah,
achieved everything. When actually,
yeah.
it's just not that case
And
whatsoever.
I think of that even some. This is crazy again, but Islam allows us to have this flexibility of thinking that death is a blessing. In many scenarios, death is a blessing. Like sometimes like I ponder on my mom's death when she died, only 67 years old, and I think about how little she got to spend time with her grandchildren, for example. But then I also think about, you never know what fitna will come, right? And
Yeah.
in a way, like whenever you're in a good state with Allah, you kind of want to go then. You don't want to delay that, because you don't know what fitna might come after you later on, whether it's in 1 year or 20 years. You never know. So going at a certain time can be, very beneficial depending on your situation. And that's why it all comes down to like Allah's favor on you, man. Like, because you just want your last deeds to be your best deeds. And, we hear of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he talks about in the end times when people would go to sleep a believer and wake up a kafir, and vice versa,
Mm.
So death, the ceiling of your deeds can be good if the ceiling of your deeds, the end of your deeds, the last deeds you do are good deeds, so
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's important to remind ourselves, I suppose. Ramadan's coming up, I suppose, and that's a good time to really, inshallah, we make it to to really capitalize. And I think that is going back to your initial question, like you said, that Ramadan, that reset is really necessary. It's just the community element especially if you live in an area where there isn't much connection with a community. That is like really multiplied tenfold, isn't it? To just be in the masjid every single day, to have that kind of aura of spirituality around you and in your house. And now that the kids are kind of getting older and they're more aware of Ramadan and they're more aware of the different vibe that's going on, it's like a reinforcing circle. Like you teach them, they kind of remind you. And it's also that the connection to all the previous Ramadans that have passed, and what it reminds you of, and what the levels that you were at maybe before, and if you can reach those levels again or surpass them, So maybe that's like part of what we're feeling is like that coming up to Ramadan. You feel like, oh, I feel a bit depleted and I want to kind of re-engage maybe. Um, I think there's something innate in every Muslim that has that in them, that kind of yearning for Ramadan again. Some people miss Ramadan even towards the end of Ramadan, right? They're still within the time period, but they start longing for even the first few days again. So I'm
Mm,
looking forward, inshallah, to Ramadan, and inshallah, may Allah keep us alive and make it a fruitful one once more.
آمين يا رب. اللهم بلغنا Ramadan. You know, okay, I've got a question for you because I don't know if you say it so much on the podcast, but I see you say it sometimes on Twitter here and there. The concept of, how do you kind of word it? You know, like I see some people talking about the lives of Muslims are not cheap, right?
Mm.
And it kind of comes into the conversation about civil wars and revolutions and, lives being put on the line and stuff like that. And someone was telling me the other day that he was in a certain Telegram group and there were people questioning, for example, the Algerian War for Independence, because,
Okay.
the estimated numbers are like 1 million people were killed. And he was asking me, what period was that in? And I believe it was only in the 8-year period of the official War of Independence, which was 1954 to 62. Okay. So that is a lot of people. And the estimates are all over the place. The lowest estimate is 300,000 and the highest estimate is 2.5 million. But I think what people usually say in Algeria is 1 million or 1.5 million, right? So these are people that died or were killed, etc., in that time. And he said somebody was saying, basically, was it worth it? Wasn't there another way to go about it without so many people being killed? So what do you think when someone if someone
Oh
asks that?
God, that is so. It's so many potholes to fall into there. I don't know. I'm not extremely familiar with the history to even give an opinion, nor am I in a position of expertise to even give an opinion on it. What I will say though is that colonization is very different, isn't it, to colonization of an entire nation. It's very different to what people call to revolutions in other situations and scenarios. Um, but then again, how different is it? I think the lines are quite blurry in modern day conflicts a lot of the time, aren't they? You know, you could have, let's take Syria, for example, again, just briefly. Like I know the Assad regime, Assad himself is Alawi, etc., and there's discussions around his right to rule over a Muslim population. There's already discussions there. But in terms of the government, the army, the entities which are underneath that kind of infrastructure, how many of them fall within the remit of Muslims? How many don't? How many, like the murkiness is there, right? And also their fellow countrymen. And Syria is one country and it's diverse. And whilst with Algeria, you kind of had a very clear us versus them mentality or entity, apart from the Harkis that are kind of here and there.
Mm.
but you know what I mean? Like you can kind of say, okay, this is a clear outsider. This is a clear
Yeah,
um,
but what about the concept of so many lives being lost
yeah, well,
in
this
that?
this is what I'm saying is like when the lines are quite clear for me. Just this is just a personal thing for me. The the conflict is quite clear. The conflict is less murky. So to say, okay, we are at war with X, that makes sense to me. That I can understand that. I can see a clear logic behind that, and maybe even more justifications for warfare in that regard. Whilst when it's a little bit more murky, I am, I must admit, I do kind of err on the side of caution because that, like being killed and killing and warfare, both sides, is such a huge thing that you'll be questioned for. And I'm sure Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful in times of strife and in times of confusion, in times of deception. Um, but I generally err on the side of caution, especially if you're opening yourself up to outside intervention and stuff. I don't know how much of that existed back then. I'm not too familiar with the war in Algeria. At the end of the day, what happened has happened, and once something starts, it's hard to go back as well. Like that's another thing. Like for example, let's say a group started it. Let's say it just in any country, but we could use Algeria as an example. A small group started this sort of rebellion. It's going to grow exponentially, and once it gets to a certain point, you can't go back because everybody suffers the consequences. Once you go back, everyone will get punished. Once let's say they surrender or whatever. Hypothetically speaking, everyone gets punished. And it's like, okay, well, there's an opportunity here. There's a momentum here. Qudra is another issue that the scholars speak about. Like, do they have the capability? And it is a matter for the scholars, really. It is a matter for the scholars. I don't think any one person can say. Like I asked you last episode about protesting, for example, and if you would, based on what you have today. And I think every single person will be judged on their own capacity. So for me to make a statement about all the people that were prepared to die and did die, I can't. However, I'm not in a position also to resign thousands of millions of people to their death. We have to do this because you're like, I see people calling to that kind of stuff today. I saw someone talking about Egypt, for example, said Egypt, Sisi has to be deposed, and they're in the UK. Sisi has to be deposed. Like, oh, you guys in Egypt, you need to do something about your. And in my head, I'm thinking, remember last time that happened, and how many people were shot up during prayer in the massacre. I think it was a Friday prayer, wasn't it? I still remember that where they were
Rabbi.
trying to pray, Rabbah, and they all just sprayed. And I'm thinking, so I I felt really uncomfortable with those kind of statements where we can just easily say things so comfortably from the UK or from America, from wherever in the West, so far removed, with the benefits of democracy and the benefits of these free speech and all this stuff. I say democracy and free speech in quotations, but you know what I mean, like the ability to say that without any repercussions. I feel like it's really dangerous and irresponsible. Now, how much of that is actually heard by the Egyptian population? And just because I say it doesn't mean they're going to listen to me and that kind of thing. There's all sorts of questions, right? But I do think we have it's very telling of us as individuals to be able to say that so comfortably, as if like our opinion holds weight. If somebody in Egypt feels so strongly and wants to say that with the risks involved, that's your that's your choice. And may Allah guide you to what's best. uh may Allah protect the people of Egypt and the Muslims of Egypt. And may
Mm.
Allah, if their ruler is as bad as they say, then may Allah replace him with one who is better, or guide him on a path that is better. That's what I will say. But to incite people into like this kind of thing where all I can think about is the the punishment that's going to befall them. And then take that back to the Algerian question. Like, would I have said the same thing back then in Algeria when we were colonized? It's a
Mm.
very difficult. I must admit, it's not a straightforward thing for me. I'm not, a pent up 13-year-old boy who's going to say yes, always, fight the power
Mm.
kind of thing. Because I think a lot of that is, I think a lot of that is just cinematic nonsense for a lot of people. It's very comfortable to watch.
Yeah, you're talking about basically the concept of skin in the game, isn't
Yeah, like if you've got skin in the game and you're a brave
it?
man and you yes, you might have things to lose, but you're prepared to defend those things, and the people that you're defending also support you. Like imagine your mother, for example, crying to you, saying, "Please keep it down. Please keep your head down. Please, you know, and have patience," and whatever it may be. Allahu alam. Certain situations, let's say it's rulers or colonizers or whatever it might be. Sometimes they are replaced just without any sort of bloodshed because Allah has decreed that they are replaced, whether that be through death, whether that be through I don't know, resigning, whether that be for outside intervention, whatever it might be. Allahu alam, Allahu alam.
Mm.
But at the same time, like especially when there's situations of leaderless rebellion, it's chaos. You know, it's so many actors just kind of swaying, and you're just the average person. Like, I mean, you're just one guy with a family. I'm just one person with a family. How do you process information and maintain all your family responsibilities and all this? Like, I don't wish that on anyone. I don't wish that fitna on anyone. It's such a huge fitna that's why I'm very kind of, oh, what happened in Syria, alhamdulillah, Bashar is gone, but how many people died? How many people lost loved ones? And I'm not detracting from that revolution, but I did say once it starts, would I have advised people to start back in the day at this with the mentality I have these days? I must admit, I don't know if I would. However, you see the horrors that have come out. You see
I
what's
think no
happening
one
in
would have.
prison. No, but once it gets to a particular point, it's like, well, I'm not going to retract. I'm not going to. I think it's mature enough to say the ball is rolling now. So may Allah guide them, and may Allah help them, may Allah aid them.
Yeah. I think
But
what's missing sometimes in that conversation is the reality of what happened, right? So in the case of Syria, the people that started protesting, they were not asking for the government to change whatsoever. They just wanted less corruption, less nepotism, etc. Now, maybe they could have judged that, or the reprisals might have been really harsh or whatever. But I'm guessing since so many of them did it, they didn't actually expect it to turn into war whatsoever, right? So they were just asking for certain things. And the response from the government was so harsh, so violent, that now it's like, naturally, people actually have to defend themselves physically. Yeah. Secondly, some of the people in the Syrian army were like, "What? I'm not doing this. I'm leaving." Now, if you're leaving, you actually have to run away. You can't just resign, give in your P45, right? So people started leaving the army, and the point is that they never planned violence or a war, and it just happened.
It's
happened.
It's right? The euphoria.
The same goes with.
What you mean? Have you ever been like in a protest or in a situation like that where it's there's this euphoria that takes over people? It's almost like a spell where I've been in protests, and I've when I was younger, especially. And I think that's where it's really dangerous, where you feel like what's happening right now, this thing you're in, because you can see it on the TV screens, you can see it on your phone when all sorts of protests happening, and you think, oh, it's just another protest, just another protest. But when you're in it, you feel like you're the center of the universe. You feel like this is being seen by the entire world. This is it. This is the moment. This is what
making history.
Exactly, we're making history. This is everything. All of history has built up to this one point. This is about to be the biggest thing, and you can't help but feel that way when you're surrounded by thousands of people and they're all chanting the same thing, and you feel like something huge is about to happen. And I think that is the danger of it. It's not about people making decisions. No one can make a rational decision in those situations, which is why I'm talking about leaderless. Like, there are certain movements. Let's take the rights movements, for example, in America. And they're generally quite successful, alhamdulillah, especially like Malcolm X, for example, taking lead in his remit, or Martin Luther King here, or whatever. There were certain figureheads and leaders that you could and I don't know how much they were seen as leaders or leadership of certain movements back in their heyday. Maybe history kind of has this ability to kind of raise people, retroactively raise people into particular leaders now. But especially when there's like movies and books and written about these personas, and they're raised quite high. However, just for example, when there's certain leaders that people can look to, they're a lot more unified. There's a movement. There's but when it's 100%. Kind of leadless, mostly it is real chaos, and only the euphoria of the people's emotions are taking them this way and that way, and the infighting and the chaos. So, but carry on. I get the fact that that's not what they wanted, but it can quickly just snowball into that.
But it can, So that's part of the risks that you have to keep in mind in anything like this. But yes, it was just qadr that the reaction was like that, and then this other reaction was like that, and before you know it, it was civil war, right? And then that civil war situation was terrible, but what it led to is the ability for a group of people to kind of have complete freedom in their own enclave. And that turned into what has ultimately ended the civil war now, 13 years later. So you never know what's going to happen, but it's kind of a judgment call, right? Like, is this going to go the wrong way, right? Same goes with October 7th. When they did that, they did not know it was going to lead to this. They would, of course, never done it if they knew it was going to lead to this. In fact, what they did, they'd actually done something similar in the past. So again, for people to kind of judge it in that way, it's like, no, nobody was like, however many, deaths we're talking about in Gaza now, between 50 and 200,000 or whatever deaths. They never thought that would happen. That's one thing. The second thing is that some people, I don't think this has been said like officially, some people said that this was seen as a way of stopping the end of the Palestinian cause, right? Because, Saudi was in talks to normalize with Israel. And then, I mean, what countries left at that point, really? I mean, there's Algeria, which is insignificant in the world stage, if you like. There's not many countries left. All the other countries are small. All the main countries would then have been normalized with Israel. And then bit by bit, you would just imagine that they would do whatever kind of thing to just erase it bit by bit. So this was a way of maybe changing history in that sense, as well as a final cry, even though you wouldn't see it like that, because it's something that would probably play out over 10 years or more. But yeah. So the point is, I was just saying that people don't really, if you act in a certain way where naturally it will result in 50,000 people being killed, 200,000, 600,000.
Well,
that's
this is
irresponsible.
It's important actually, because
Yeah.
this is like some people's contention with the neighboring countries of Palestine and the decisions they made and the movements they made towards normalizing. Because I think it's either that or all-out war, which is what you're saying, and all-out war also equals millions of people dying. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So people
I
want to.
don't accept that those are the only two choices.
No, but I'm not talking about your choices. I'm talking
And the
about a
decision
lot
on
of the
the
commentators.
decision on October 7th was not even to have an
No,
all-out war either.
of course. But I'm talking about the commentators that maybe decry those kind of decisions by certain countries in the region. I just feel
Yeah.
like, because for example, when Iran started shooting rockets back and forth, they got super excited, and this is how it should be. And then they kind of got swept up in this whole Russian Iranian, I don't know, propaganda, if you want to call it that, or whatever it might be. Okay, they're like, okay, this is what they should be doing. This is what the Sunni country should be doing,
Yeah.
right? Now, I still maintain that a lot of that was theatrics. Other than that, what choices do you have but to cut your losses? You got to also remember that a lot of the conditions for these kind of normalizations was a Palestinian state. I don't know. Obviously, we don't know how far along those talks got and how far along. Obviously, the Israeli government leadership are absolutely opposed to that idea, and they don't want a Palestinian state whatsoever. And maybe that's why a lot of these talks didn't actually reach the end goal. We have to judge by what's apparent, and what's apparent is that each discussion about normalization was with a Palestinian state in mind. You can get under the table conversations and conspiracies and say, oh no, actually they don't care that much, blah blah blah. We can only judge by what the statements are.
But
So
what
let's
was
say,
it?
for example,
What was in the Abraham Accords, which was with Morocco, UAE, Bahrain, and what was
you're
the other
there.
country?
I'm talking about more the Saudi one, for example. The
Oh,
Saudi
only
one is
okay.
always maintained.
Yeah, I've heard about
Uh,
that. Yes.
yeah, and I think maybe the others are all like, because there's always this discussion, isn't it? America talks about it, the UN talks about it, the UK talk about it, all these European nations talk about a pathway to a Palestinian state, as opposed to
Mhm.
the firm establishment of one.
Mhm.
Um,
And by the way, a Palestinian state might not actually work in the favor of the Palestinian cause. That's something to keep
mhm,
in mind.
mhm. But also, like, I don't know what the alternative would be. Would the alternative, like, how do you? When I was younger, I must admit, I used to think of Israel as a very new phenomenon, which, in the grand scheme of history is quite new.
Yeah.
But there's an established population there. There's people that have been
Mhm.
born there, and there's generations there now. And it's like, okay, its existence is a fact of life. So how do you solve that? The one state solution makes the most sense, where, okay, you have these populations living together under one law, where they all, are equal rights, equal everything. And that's the only way forward, really. Two states isn't going to really work. You can't get rid of every single Israeli from the region. I don't think that's going to be feasible or possible in today's modern age. I just don't. Many will leave, maybe voluntarily, if they've got more, dual nationalities, etc., etc.
All I'm going to say is the French are in Algeria longer than Israel has existed.
Mm,
That's all I'm
okay,
going to say.
okay, okay. But the French had somewhere to go to. I'm talking about the people
Oh,
that have, like, French are French and they went to France. So you could say, yes, okay, dual nationals, etc., etc. But these are people who have really cemented their identity with this region now, and they've built a
Mhm.
whole,
Yeah,
flag and culture and all sorts. I say culture very loosely, but you know what I mean. Basically, I'm saying it's like in this day and age, it's very messy, and
it is messy.
no power is going to support that, if you know what I mean. No power is going to say, yes, you can exile all these people. You know, we. This is why, like, two states is actually the weakest of the solutions, because it's the one that, okay, generally everyone can say, oh yeah, it makes sense, two states, ooh, by side. It's actually the one state is the golden child here, which no one really talks about too much, but it's what it should be. The leadership of that one state, that's a different discussion for people with higher pay grade than me. Obviously, as Muslims, we're going to say, we want Sharia, we want this and that, etc., and just how things were in the past, where everybody was ruled by that. But you've got a very different, reality on the ground, and you've got stages and that gradualism we spoke about. And also, you've got what they claim as Palestinian citizens in Israel, but you see how many rights of theirs aren't given, and see how it's like like they say, an apartheid state, really. And you've even got Arabs in the parliament, but how often are they ridiculed and mocked, and how much say do they really have, and that kind of thing. But the inverse of that is that you've got a huge population of Palestinians. If they were incorporated into a singular state, I'm not saying it's Israel. I'm not saying it's just a singular state. Let's call it Palestine, where all the Jews, for example, that exist in Israel right now, they're incorporated into this Palestinian state. And for those who want to leave can leave. Those who want to stay can stay. But the law is all
Yeah, it could be
the
something
law.
like what they're doing in Syria right now with the Alawites, for example.
Mm,
That it's kind of like weird, really, because in the Syrian civil war, the enemy was always Alawis, really. Like it wasn't about just Bashar. It was like this: we're fighting this
yeah.
Alawi, Nusayri, Bashar. Like it was always
Yeah,
those
yeah, yeah,
labels
yeah,
in it.
yeah.
And now that they've won, it's like, oh yeah, they're gonna get their rights and they're gonna have this
Well,
and that.
yeah. I
But
mean, look,
deep down, it's like it's a bit of a conflict. But
you've
they've
got to
got to
deal with
act
it.
in a
That's
way
the
because
reality,
yeah, exactly. There's a reality, and I think they're
and
a
that's
decent chunk of the population,
that's
maybe
all I'm saying.
10% or something.
That's all I'm saying. Because look, we want to. This is my belief, and anyone can disagree with me, and maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
Mm.
But the Palestinian struggle, I feel like shifting it to a civil rights struggle is a lot more beneficial for the Palestinian identity and population, Muslims at large, than a violent resistance one. If you can transition into a civil rights struggle at some point, then you've got the opportunity to carry on that. What's better? Palestinians can exist and they can continue and they can grow in number, etc., or this mowing of the grass technique that Israel always brags about, and this just decimation of the population, uh, this transfer of the population across the world so far that they can't even connect with Palestine anymore. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like this death and destruction, millions of people being killed. Allahu alam. Allahu alam. This is
Yeah.
where I think. And right now,
Yeah.
like, not that Syria has gone into this yet. I'll be very surprised if there really is uh, like large scale inequality and injustice between different groups in Syria. I would be very surprised unless it's like
Yeah.
manufactured to kind of send a message to Europe or America or whatever that people are being oppressed, etc. However, it would be a civil rights one ideally, as opposed to a violent, factional warfare. You can't even go out. Like the inability to go out and buy a piece of bread and come back home is such a huge thing. It's such a huge thing, even in the Arab mind. Just that the lack of security, and that's what we want. We want, because within some level of security, a population can flourish, even if it's just the growth of that population, economically, business wise, dawah wise, Islam. Like you can't really give much dawah when you're shielding yourself from bombs and explosions or
Yeah.
whatever. So you need some level of security to then move to take the struggle to a different kind of paradigm. And a lot of fuel can be injected into that struggle in that paradigm.
Mm.
whilst
Yeah.
in warfare, in the situation that Palestinians are in, so many of them, alhamdulillah, are so close to their faith, so close to Islam. Okay. But there's so many that are growing up with the inability to take their society forward. No schools, no education, no food. All they're focused on is the basic needs of survival. Uh, there's no fuel for growth of a society or a state or a country or a people in a situation where your babies are freezing to death. You know, they're starving to death. All you can think about is the next meal, when it will come. And this has gone on for a while. This particular, obviously, since October 7th, and unfortunately, there hasn't been much progress in the region to try and stop it from happening. Um, I'm not decrying from any sort of resistance here, and it's just a discussion, I suppose, on all these different aspects that one has to take into account before they get on the streets and protest, right? In any conflict. Uh,
Yeah. I
so
think
it's go
the
on.
reason I brought up Algeria, because we were talking about death, right? We're talking about the getting rewarded for stuff that you might not see the fruits of in your life.
Right, yeah.
And then some, and then this person or these people were kind of questioning, like
Is it worth it? Yeah.
Algeria, 1 million died, or Afghanistan even, they were saying 20 years of war and this and that. I think it's a very un-Islamic way of thinking, to be honest. It's as though the purpose of life is not to please Allah and to worship Allah and to go and to go to Jannah. The purpose of life is to like live as long as possible and live as comfortably as possible. And that's not what we hear, right? That's not what we hear in the Sirah. That's not what we hear about the Sahaba. We hear the Sahaba were like, wait, I can go to Jannah right now. Okay, well then any time I don't spend going into that battlefield is a waste. That's what we hear, right? And that's for everyone to make a decision about whether they're willing to do that, whether their iman is high enough or not, etc. But the point is that those million Algerians that gave their life, it was not just to like live a better life and to be able to get like pizza restaurants and fast internet, bro. Right? That they were fighting for Algeria to be a land where Islam is practiced. Right? And alhamdulillah, because of their sacrifice, how many tens of millions of people in Algeria now can practice their religion, spread their religion, and get closer to Allah? Right? How many people can do that because of those sacrifices? Is that not worth it? Is that not enough? And those people that died in that cause, because the cause was good, because the cause was something bigger than, having internet and electricity and bread, right? Because of that, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون, bro.
Are they saying that to you because they're not happy with how it is now?
As 2025 rolls in, a lot of us reflect on that milestone of what we've actually accomplished in the last year. And a lot of us will be happy with a few things we've done, but we always know we could have done more, or some of us really feel like we've done nothing and it's just been a failure of a year. So now's a chance to reset and rethink and lock in and think, what do I want to achieve in the next year and how will I do that? And for that, I've got the perfect thing, a complete guide on crushing your goals in 2025. It helps you with procrastination that a lot of people face. It helps you with negative self-talk, and it helps with distractions that come along the way. And these are things that are stopping you. They're the barrier, a solid iron wall in the way of accomplishing your big goals, like starting that business, getting that promotion, getting married, whatever it is for you. So go and download it right now. It takes you full step by step through exactly what you need to accomplish your goals this year.
Are they saying,
no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think they were just generally questioning, isn't there another way? Isn't there a diplomatic way? Does it always have to cost this many lives and this and that? And I'm like, yeah, we should always try and think of a clever way, a smart way where we don't have to spend those lives. But when those lives are spent for the good cause, bro, for an amazing cause, it's worth it, bro. And I'm not saying it's worth it for me so I can go and practice Islam in Algeria. I'm saying that Shahada is worth everything for them.
I think
right?
it's that conflict between. I agree with your sentiment completely. It's just I think the people's apprehension is the conflict between the sanctity of a believer's soul and the outcome that you may or may not get. And I think like there's that risk that people try and juggle in their heads, especially when they're not there. Like this is like neither of us are
Well, yeah,
neither of us were
yeah.
there. I can't comment on people's motivations at the time. I don't know how many people were prepared to go and how many people were caught up in the crosshairs. I that's another thing. Like how many people
But
have I
even
dragged
them, inshallah,
reluctantly?
they're shaheed.
Inshallah, and this
Like
is like your
I'm not there. I'm not putting my neck on the line, etc. But I make du'a for the iman to be willing to
absolutely,
do such a
yeah,
thing. I make,
absolutely,
like, don't we
absolutely,
all make du'a for that kind of iman?
yeah,
If that's
yeah,
what we're all asking for, then I'm not saying to be unwise and needlessly, do reckless things. But I'm
yeah,
saying that, come on, bro, what is life for? And then when
yeah,
you look at the opposite, what's the opposite of something like Algeria, something like whatever, Syria, this, what's the opposite? The opposite is like Uzbekistan, where you can't even wear hijab and you can't grow
yeah,
a
yeah,
beard and you can't pray in the
yeah,
masjid. And we talk about, bro, those Central Asian countries, some of the most anti-Islamic governments there left over by the Soviets, and there's tens of millions of people who
yeah,
are deprived of being able to practice and spread and learn about their religion.
mm,
Right?
mm,
I don't know the details of whether they couldn't struggle, they tried, they couldn't. Of course, there's always a group that are trying to defend their religion, and sometimes though it comes to the case where you have to flee. Like, it's literally like
yeah,
blah blah blah. But the point is, that's the opposite, right? That's the
yeah.
opposite.
Oh,
Uh,
the qudra
so yeah.
element as well, though, isn't there? Like, okay, think
Yes.
about think about at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you want to use those
God salam.
examples, you know,
Mm.
yes, numbers were different. There was a big difference between the numbers of armies, but each army was had access to similar weaponry. Swords versus swords, shields versus shields, arrows
Yeah.
versus arrows. I think,
Yeah. And
uh, and
civilians
it,
were much rarer to be caught
yeah,
in the crossfire. Yeah.
yeah, and it was quite clear. What we talk about now is just a lot of the time these things start as essentially, I hate to say it, but cannon fodder. Essentially, like numbers of a huge amount of people against highly armed uh, forces. So a huge amount of generally unarmed people who
Yeah.
initiate against, like, and I'll never forget what happened in Egypt. I can't forget that. I mean, a lot of people who are too young to remember, just look it up. Just look it up. This isn't like an endorsement of any Egyptian government or whatsoever. It's just this reluctance to see what happened happen again, uh, which is people either praying in protest or praying their Jumu'ah Salah out in the open, just after a protest or during a protest, etc., and just getting sprayed and gunned down. And now, yes, you would say that may Allah will give them an incredible position in Jannah for that dying in that state. Yeah, but nobody wants to see that. I wouldn't want my son to be there and be shot like that as a parent.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want your kids, and it's easy when you're young to not think like that. I wouldn't want, I wouldn't want to put my family in that position. Like, maybe, yeah, is that me saying that I have a certain attachment to the dunya? Or is it me saying that the sanctity of a Muslim's life is really important to me? There's that element. That's the element I'd like to think I'm focusing on. Um, so I think this is the difficulty. It's like, I think that the apprehension I have is that I'm not in that position. I'm not there, and I feel
Yeah.
really uncomfortable. Just kind of like when I go to Tunisia, for example, no one I speak to wants what happened before to happen again, despite the fact that I would personally think that things are a lot better than they were, even religiously speaking. You know, like I can have a beard, and no one's going to arrest me and kidnap me and beat me up. From the stories I hear before, and there's a lot of people sacrifice their freedom, sacrifice their life, sacrifice their struggles that got to us to that point. But at the same time, the average citizen doesn't want chaos and warfare. They want stability and they want their ability to grow. But how much, once again, how much of that is when and the love of the dunya? How much of that is? This is why I think for all of these discussions, it's important to go back to the scholars and scholars that are also not. I don't want to say this in a bad way, but like there are political affiliations, isn't there? When it comes to certain houses of knowledge, unfortunately. So it is a very murky, muddy arena that two podcast bros might be stepping on landmines just talking about. But I get it, and like if anyone's listening to this and thinks they want to criticize on any positions that either of me and you have, I think it's stupid to do so because we're only talking about the different aspects of these complexities that you have to take into account. whatever decision anyone decides is that they've got yaqeen on, and this is what Allah would want. I make dua for you. I really do. I sincerely make dua that Allah guides whatever population or whatever spokesman or whatever kind of commentator. May Allah guide them to what's best. May Allah guide me to what's best. Because these situations are so above our pay grade, so above them, that you just never know. And you fall into maybe saying something that you'll be questioned about. Yawm al-Qiyamah. That's the thing for me. I just ask Allah for guidance for my tongue
Yeah.
for these situations. Honestly.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, it can get very complicated. And I think, like you said, especially in this day and age, I find myself a bit confused because all the amazing examples that I learn about are a certain direction. And I'm just like, whoa, right?
Yeah.
As an example, the Senussia in Libya, they were a tribe,
Yeah.
very devoted to Islam. I believe this was in the early 20th century. They were fighting the Italians, okay?
Yeah.
And they were fighting the Italians, and they were very ill-equipped, okay? They're very ill-equipped, but they're putting up the struggle against the Italians. And then the Ottoman Sultan, he told them to, and by the way, from my knowledge, the Ottoman Empire was kind of on its last legs at that time. And, you might question the authority of the Khalifa, etc., right? But they were ordered, the Senussia were ordered to attack the British in Egypt, okay?
Right.
Because I believe it was because the British were basically attacking the Ottoman Empire at that time. Now, these guys are very ill-equipped, bro. They can't fight the Italians on one side and then enter the Egypt and attack the Brits in Egypt. Not to mention that their main source of weapons and stuff was coming from Egypt. Okay,
Yeah.
so they're gonna shut themselves off. But this is where I say, wow. Okay, but they said the Khalifa told us to. We're gonna do it.
Yeah, well, that goes back to the
Right?
leadership element, right?
And
That goes
these
back.
guys, no, but what happened next was they just got decimated, bro, completely.
Right.
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 I don't know the details of whether like any survived or it was just such, took such a big blow. But the point is that they decided to do something that is like, yeah, when you say the word qudra, it's like, do we have the qudra to fight the Italians and the British at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
no. But,
Yeah.
wow. That's what I can say to that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. I guess, I mean, part of that part, let's go back to Syria again. Part of it was the preparation element that you were speaking about last episode,
Yeah.
and there is something to be said about that preparation for liberation, so to speak. Some of that is diplomatic, some of that is militarily, some of that is, so these are all elements. When you're protesting against a backdrop of many, many leaders that have already fallen, and you're like the next country in line, that tyrant is going to think, oh, this is what's, it's my turn. Well, I'm gonna unleash hell upon these people that protested because I'm not having it. I just, it's so, look, it's
It
such a
boggles
huge
your
topic
mind,
for me.
bro. It
It
boggles
does.
your mind.
There is no right answer to me, bro.
But this is example. This is what I'm talking about now. Is nothing to do with like trying to topple a government. It's more to do with like black and white fighting the enemy, etc.
That's exactly.
It just does boggle my mind. Like the same with the Battle of Mutta, when what was it? I believe 5,000 or 3,000? 3,000, I think. 3,000 Muslims went out to fight an Arab tribe that was allied with the Byzantines, the Romans, because the Prophet ﷺ sent a messenger to that tribe and invited them to Islam, and they killed him, right?
Right.
So they sent out an expedition. On the way there, they find out that this Arab tribe has 100,000 soldiers, and they're being backed up by another 100,000 Romans.
Right.
So they're against 200,000 soldiers, okay? And halfway there, they're like, what do we do? They actually sat down and they were discussing like, what should we do here, man?
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, yeah, should we ask the Prophet ﷺ what to do, because the Prophet ﷺ wasn't with them in that battle. And I said, should we ask the Prophet ﷺ? Should we actually just go back and try and get reinforcements and then come, or should we just go to the battle? And what's his name? I believe it was Abdullah bin Rawaha. He stood up in front of them and he said, "This is what I'm saying, bro. Wow, okay." He stood up in front of them and he said, "No, we don't need to ask no one's advice." He said, "Isn't the thing that you're faced with now,
Yeah.
basically annihilation, isn't that what you came looking for?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you came looking for?" And he said, "Never have we won battles from our number or our, weaponry or anything like that. We've only beat the enemy with Islam, with our
Mm.
iman, with this deen." He actually, I believe the wording he says, with this deen. This is how we've won battles, right? And he said, look, there's nothing to question. Let's go, right?
Mm.
Let's go. And this is actually interesting. It goes back to the topic of barakah, right? And the power of good intentions and sincerity and high iman. So they were on board with him and they went to the battle, bro. And what's the outcome of that battle? They won, bro. How is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
That's
You know,
barakah, bro. That's sincerity.
I think the problem is in this day and age where we live in a time where a lot of those stories and a lot of that rhetoric is also used uh, in a way I would say dangerously. Because let's take Syria again as an example. Okay, so we were talking about how fascinating it was that they achieved what they achieved, and now they've taken out Bashar, and now they're implementing what we say, gradualistic kind of government, right? There are people now in this day and age immediately actually making takfir of the government straight away because of certain decisions they've allowed. For example, there was a Christmas thing like, oh, we're gonna make it a holiday and the Christian population can celebrate Christmas openly, etc. And I was seeing these tweets day and age. Oh, he's a kafir, he's a tyrant, he's a mushrik, and he also,
Yeah.
we declare war against him as well. That kind of rhetoric, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and I just thought, okay, so people are using that same narrative, that same like, pure, I wouldn't say idealistic, but using it in a way where they kind of negate the fiqh al-waqi' sort of, and try and push that idealistic agenda once again. So
Think things.
what I'm saying is that the same rhetoric of, these people are oppressors, or these people are colonizers, or these people are working with the kuffar, whatever you want to talk about when it comes to leadership, is just
Mm.
constantly going to be used at every single point. No one is going to reach that perfect level where you can actually stop building something, because there'll always be this entity of individuals that think, nope, it's not good enough. We need to get to war with them. Nope, it's not good enough. We need to get to war with them. And this is my justification. Look at this. Hey, look at this story. Look at this hadith, and that kind of rhetoric. And this is why I'm not negating what you're saying, by the way. And I'm sure
Yeah.
there's extremities in every kind of viewpoint, and there are people that fall into those extremes. But when you're in that extreme, you don't think you're extreme. When you're in, and that's why I'm trying to have this self awareness and this kind
Yeah.
of self awareness
But
that
I'm
people should
telling
have.
these stories. I'm not applying it to any specific thing. I'm just
No, of
saying,
course.
like, these are when you read history and you read the Sirah, this is the type of stuff you read, and
Yeah.
you're like that. What I take from that is that is the default position. That is the way we should believe and think, and that's the type of
Well,
iman we should aim
yeah.
for. Now, when you're talking about what you just said, I just think that's kind of completely different thing. I think like on a separate note, like, yeah, those kind of people that are never satisfied and they don't understand the vision, they don't understand the calculus being put in place, they just lack knowledge probably, and to be honest, they just need to be shut up. Like, I don't have tolerance for that.
A lot of that calculus is inferred based on what we assume the best of certain leaders.
Kind
Nobody
of, not
said, nobody
100%,
said,
but
okay,
kind of.
nobody said in Syria, no one said in
Yeah.
Syria in this day and age, since they've taken power, and
Mm.
let's take Jolani, for example. He hasn't said, oh, yeah, they can have Christmas now and all this open stuff now, blah, blah. But later on down the line, we're gonna really put the Sharia back in town. We're really gonna come. Now, yes, they'll take his previous statements in the past, etc., but his more gradualistic, open, diverse statements of this day and age, well, they're only assumed to be well and good because by the people that want to assume good. but people want to celebrate the achievement, right?
I think the people that are saying those negative things, I think they're mostly like, I've fallen into that rabbit hole a little bit, and I think they're all pretty much ISIS who do take fear of everyone
Yeah,
anyway. So
of
they're
course.
like,
What I'm saying is
that's,
that mentality doesn't have to have that name. It could be anyone's name. It could be anyone. It could be,
yeah,
you don't have to be part of that group or even align with them to kind of have that mentality.
yeah,
Because I saw people that I know that are, anti-ISIS, etc. And
yeah,
for example, there was an incident where within, okay, let's take this example. There was people within, you know what, we never know who did it actually, but there was somebody or group of people within Syria. It could have been part of the rebel fighters. It could have been inside job. It could have been anything that burnt this massive Christmas tree, just set
yeah,
it alight. So
yeah,
the government or the front-facing government or the leadership,
yeah,
put out the fire, made statements saying, no, we're not about this, etc., etc. Now that either
yeah,
signals people there that are in disagreement, or it signals that there's people there that want to cause issues on purpose,
yeah,
and there's all sorts of options. However, there was
mm,
people online, Muslims, open Muslims, that you can see, they've got some credit for Islam, that are saying, no, we shouldn't have these Christmas trees. We shouldn't have this stuff. And this is awful. And this is
yeah,
betrayal to the Mujahideen and the betrayal to this. And so I'm saying like this, and this discourse exists. And what I'm trying to say is like,
yeah,
with any discussion about these kind of issues, you need to be aware of the the playing field at play and all the different actors and all the different positions and all the different
yeah,
tallies that you're dealing with. Because once again, you might have a pure movement that can easily be hijacked straight away by someone on this side or that side, you know. And and when I say hijack, there's positive hijacks and there's negative. Positive is like, okay, when people were protesting against, I don't know, even Bashar, bro. People started protesting against Bashar. Were they protesting specifically because they wanted to implement Islam, or were they protesting for certain freedoms, certain rights, certain, And generally speaking, that's what a lot of it is. Like you said, there was no deposition of governments or deposition of leaders being called for. It's when people's needs are dire, people are suffering extreme hardship, that their iman increases, that Islam becomes the number one kind of vision in their head a lot of the time. We see that day to day with our own struggles. We could be chasing this X, Y, Z, but when we're really feeling the tightness and the pressure of the dunya, our iman increases, and actually all that matters is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his religion. So there's elements and dynamics to this whole discussion that if you're
mm,
ever going to step into this arena to talk about, you need to be very aware of. And like we said, all I was saying is those examples that you give, they're
yeah.
fascinating and they're encouraging examples, really. And it makes you think. As long as you're doing something sincerely for Allah's religion, then you can't really go wrong.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Yeah,
But we could see we can see how people also have that same kind of apparent aspiration or rhetoric, but they're also undermining the Muslims at large with it.
yeah, and that's why we need. It's that combination of zeal and knowledge, I suppose. Those two
Yeah,
things coming together, and
leadership.
hierarchy, and yeah, and listening to
Because
people
what
ahead
you
of
said,
you in
Aki,
knowledge and experience.
the story you gave, the biggest
Mm,
takeaway from me wasn't necessarily we've got Islam and we're going to go because we're doing this for Islam. The biggest takeaway for me was that it was leadership. Even
mm,
before that, even the one where they were decimated against Italy, they had leadership telling them, if you've got leadership,
mm,
then you're following
mm,
the Amir Mu'min, so to speak, and you're carrying on that plan. And
mm,
actually, the outcome isn't necessarily with you. And that Amir Mu'minin is questioned based on his knowledge and his capacity at the time.
mm. Yeah,
But when
subhanallah.
you've yeah,
Like the
that's
hadith
what lifts that
of
from you.
having a leader, even if there's three of you, and you're
Yeah,
on a journey or whatever. Pick a leader. Yeah, crazy.
and
It's
that's
very
why, like,
important.
I
Even
don't
even
buy
to the point
into.
where
Go on.
in the Quran, when Allah allows Muslims to fight Muslims, right? But for what reason? Well, I mean, I guess the hadith also brings this together, which is there should only be one leader, right? Like if we're talking about Muslims at large, and then there's the whole ayat about if two Muslims are fighting, two groups of Muslims are fighting, then then try and make reconcile between them. But then if one of them oversteps the boundaries, then fight the one who is who is,
Yeah.
what's the word, bro, in English?
The
Fight the one
transgressor.
who
Yeah.
is, yeah, transgressing, right? So you're actually allowed to fight them in order to kind of bring the wrongdoer to back into the place in the hierarchy
Yeah.
and the structure.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very, very important, yeah, bro. Leadership and unity, etc.
But we live in a time where there are so many leaders of Muslim countries, and within
Mm.
those countries, sometimes there are leaders of movements and leaders of
Yeah,
groups and leaders like so it is when it reminds me of the signs of the end times where the fitna can become so fierce that
yeah,
some people just need to retreat back to a mountain somewhere and bite the bark of a tree, that
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing. So
yeah.
that's like people argue about leaders having to be recognized by other leaders to be leaders. Have you ever seen that
Okay.
discourse? So
Mm.
take what or rebellions or that kind of thing. Although it's interesting to see people that are very fierce with that when it comes to your typical established rulers in, I don't know, the Gulf or North Africa or wherever it may be. But when a new leader comes into Syria, they're immediately criticizing them. And I'm thinking, where's the consistency here? Because last week you were saying that we need to obey the ruler, and this week
Mm.
there's a new ruler in town and you don't want to obey. And I think
Mm.
that's where I'm also aware of the political kind of motivations of people that speak from the other angle, speak about Islam, speak about the rulings, or speak about what we need to do. But then when it comes to politics and this kind of element, but then they're very sided and very two-faced with how they wish to apply that. It's like
Mm.
your leader isn't a leader unless my leader recognizes him. Well, he's part of this sect or this group or this, I don't know, Sunni or Salafi or whatever. Even you can't really prove that either. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, there's no consistency here. I'm saying it's
Yeah.
just so messy. It's so messy when it
Mm.
comes to where you take your knowledge from, when it comes to where you take your politics from, your geopolitical analysis sprinkled with a bit of Islam on it. It's just, it's chaos. It's a dangerous sphere. So once again,
Mm.
with all of it, with this discussion, you ask Allah for guidance. A lot of decisions, a lot of things we think about don't actually relate to us in our day to day. So only certain decisions in life that relate to the wider ummah present themselves in front of us where we have to make an important choice. But we like to stick our noses in the business of Egyptians or Syrians or whatever it may be. And this goes on all sides of the spectrum. I'm happy for Syrians and I make dua for the Syrians. And I hope Syria grows into a beautiful Muslim country and continues to grow with leadership. But at the same time, I'm not going to I saw someone in the Netherlands, for example, sit in the Netherlands saying, hey, you're not doing good enough. You're not doing good enough over there. That Christmas tree needs to come down. Whilst you're paying taxes to government that's also paying Israel to genocide Palestinians. Like, have some mental clarity. Like, when you're,
Mental clarity.
no,
That's
honestly,
a generous term. Yeah.
when you're in that position, you need to have some self awareness. Like, you do not expect perfection for yourself, but you expect it of people that have just been through X, Y, Z. And I say that for every Muslim country. And then you've heard me say it again and again on the podcast. But that's what pushes me to be a bit more reserved with certain things I say about other people's situations and countries and stuff. Because me myself, I'm in the UK, bro. I'm paying taxes to government. You know, like I
Yeah.
feel guilty. How can I sleep at night knowing that I'm part of the problem and I'm trying to shout at other people for not being 100% pure and perfect in whatever they want to achieve? I should have husn al-dhan of them, just like I'd expect them to have husn al-dhan of me. They could turn around to me and say, hey, you're this and that, and you're paying taxes and blah, blah, blah. And they could have husn al-dhan and say, but you know what? ظروفك, you're not able, you haven't got the capacity. And you know what I should say? I should say, وانت زادة ظروفك and you haven't got the capacity, and may Allah aid you, may Allah aid us. And that's how Muslims should be
Mm.
with each other.
Yeah. A bit of wisdom, man.
Yeah.
I must admit, bro, I paid taxes to the UK government the other day, bro. I had to file my business accounts and I'm supposed to not have any profit, but I ended up with a bit of profit. So I had to pay like, I think it was £20 in tax, bro.
So, man's talking here about rebellion and revolutions. Kind of rebel against the UK. No, but
Yeah.
it's just self awareness, bro. It's like it's not that your feelings are bad or that they're misplaced. It's that like that self awareness of like you expect people to give their lives, and you can even move country, or you couldn't even like that element of it. Like it's the
Yeah.
rhetoric that's been,
Yeah. Yeah. There's a bit of wisdom, a
yeah,
bit of self awareness, a bit of maturity, a bit of this and that. I think that's why history is so fascinating, man. Like, you can learn so much from the details. Like, I started listening to this series. It's called Bain al-Ihtilalain, between the two occupations, and it's about
Yeah.
the, is it the, I want to say 12th century, when the, the Crusaders were in Sham, and then you had the Mongols coming from the east, and is
Oh
that
boy, bad
almost one of the
times.
worst periods in history. And it's just very complicated, bro. So many. The lecturer, he listed off 11 factions that were involved in this scenario. 11 different factions, and he's like, yeah, I'm mentioning the Ayyubids as a faction, but really it was like 9 different people that were
Mm,
sharing the power. It was just
mm,
crazy, bro.
yeah,
So it's very
and
complicated, and it needs a lot.
it's interesting that there is a bit of a disconnect between what people's perceived history is, because people think, oh, when we had the Khilafah, it was great. That's what we need to go back to, you know.
Mm,
And they consider everything up until the Ottomans as Khilafah. So they consider that we should be there and we should be in that kind of period. Now, the Ottomans were quite a huge empire in that sense. But you have to go back just a little bit, kind of what you said, to realize there have been times where we're also as disconnected as we probably are now in terms of, different, well, not maybe it's not as much now because there's so many different nation states.
mm,
But even then, like you said, how many factions are under one kind of umbrella, and how many were against each other, and how many were on each other? And what would your tweets be if you lived back then? Like, what
mm.
would you be putting out?
Yeah,
How different would it be to the rhetoric you put out today,
yeah.
and this sort of
Yeah.
absolutionist mentality that you
And
might
that's
have
why I
today?
guess we have to recognize the insignificance of our strongly held opinions if we don't
Yeah,
have the knowledge. Like, if you don't understand the Sharia and the history, and know what has happened throughout the ages, then really you shouldn't have too strong of an opinion right now, really.
yeah,
Because there's so much, like, this series. Can you imagine how much you're going to learn from that, bro? Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
learning about one of the darkest, one of the most complicated times in Islamic history, right? Like, that's
Mm,
that's amazing, but it's only a few percent of the Muslim population that knows these details of history, right?
mm.
Myself, I'm not included in one of those, but I find it very interesting to at least dabble in it. Um, so yeah, bro. But all this talk of Syria and stuff, it just makes me think of the end times, bro. Like, I listened to this podcast. This guy, I don't know who he was, but he seemed like a proper expert on it. Just the way he was able
Yeah,
to respond with no ums and ahs, and just straight to the quotes and straight to the facts. It was about, I guess, the recent Syrian victory in the context of the end times, and they strayed away from Syria, like, it was just in general. But yeah, those times are crazy. He was actually saying that, from his understanding of the events that will happen, that, like, the Mahdi will not actually come as the first of a kind of guided leader and the good days. He's actually
okay.
come as one of the later leaders in the good days. And he was saying that, from his understanding, he was saying that this victory in Syria, inshallah, it's a very good thing, and it's the beginning of a good period that will come.
Mm.
From his understanding, if he puts it into the context of the ahadith and stuff about it. Um, but yeah, and then you'll have that good period, and then the Mahdi will come, etc. So yeah, bro, I guess, yeah, we have
It's look
to
when it comes to
prepare.
that. I mean, it's the rahmah of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala that allows us to, if we survive, and whoever is around that time
Yeah,
during like the times of the Dajjal, etc., is that at least we have leadership to kind of to guide
mm,
us in a sense, or to follow those kind of orders or whatever it may be. That
yeah,
imagine the fitan of the end times without a leader, without the Mahdi or Isa alayhi salam after him.
yeah.
Imagine that, like that is just pure chaos. That is just unadulterated chaos.
That's why some people will go astray, because they
Yeah.
either they don't have a leader, or they don't follow orders, or they're following the wrong leader who's not, guided, this kind of thing. So yeah, you're exactly, like, that's what I think of when I think of the end times, and I think of, like, chaos and fitan. I think of either I need to be very knowledgeable and grounded, or I at least need to have someone who can guide me, right, and put me on the right track. Because even interpreting, like, let's be real, bro, like in about 2012, 2013, when like Daesh came on the scene, there was a lot of doubts and questions around not just them, but the whole thing and all the different factions in the war, especially for people who didn't know all the details of it. There was a lot of question marks and doubts. And I was like, imagine I was there. Like, how would you find clarity, right? And the
Yeah.
answer is that I guess clarity is something that Allah gifts you, but one of the ways that you can achieve that gift is by having scholars, right? Scholars
Of course.
who they know the Sharia, they're experienced, they have the wisdom that Allah, bestows on them. And like Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. So, if you're someone who's striving, someone who's putting in the effort, someone who has the knowledge as well,
It's
we need that, bro,
even
in our life
even the
to
fitna then,
interpret
bro.
the ongoings.
Like, remember the coup in Mecca? Was it Juhayman? What was that? I mean, I think it was like the 70s or something. Was it?
Yeah, 79, I think, 78, 9.
Yeah, and then there was an apprehension among the scholars of the time, like, oh, is this
Yeah, what if he's legit? Yeah.
what if he's legit? Like, so they're just as human. So I think that's why a lot of the time I always say to myself, it's easy to get on this slippery slope of tea talk, qahwa talk with the uncles about politics and about how far things go. And I say to myself, how much of this relates to my day to day and what my decisions are day to day? Now the only thing I will say is that I am a bit outspoken when it comes to these kind of things, only because I try and I try and minimize these fitan, these the verbal chaos, or the things that we might have to be questioned about Yom Al Qiyamah. Some people make statements about entire people, and it's like, have you just slandered an entire nation that you have to be questioned for? Like, each individual person in that nation now has something against you, and that's something I could be questioned about. Each individual group, whatever it might be. It's like these are going all the way back to the beginning of this podcast about the mortality element. It's like these are huge. These are like life's biggest issues that are occurring. These huge problems that people for generations upon generations have racked their head around. How many people, how many generations of people have tried to better their countries or better the Ummah? You know, People huge, better, greater than us, and they have resigned themselves to just their small sphere of influence that a lot of youngsters might criticize them for. It's like, you're doing this is what you're doing. You should be out there doing that or doing this. It's like, well, this person, this knowledgeable person, this whoever it is, has considered that all the options, this is where they're best useful. And we need to also consider where we're best useful for the entire Ummah. And someone over there, it's like Enzil and Manazilahum, right? Like, people have their positions, their players. They should respect that what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve in this different spheres. And like you said about goal setting, etc., what part of your goal is to benefit the ummah, and how do you best do that? Whether that is helping people financially, whether that is helping people in their religion, whether it is spreading the knowledge, whether it is dawah, whether it is all sorts of things. It's like you have a part to play. Your part might not be up there on the throne, but it's somewhere in this kind of swinging of the pendulum, so to speak, from the bad times to the good times between two occupations.
Mm.
So I think that's what it is. I think make dua for people that are in positions that you of influence, positions, whether it is, new leadership in
Mm.
Syria, or the new religious movement in such and such place, or the new dawah in wherever. Like, make dua for them sincerely, and make dua for even the people that you may disagree with. Like, me and you might disagree on certain things, but I also always come back to the point that I know you want what's good for the ummah. You might have a different avenue towards it. You might think, actually, we
Mm.
should be this way, that way. But I know that I can agree with you that we want what's best for the ummah. And even if you disagree with me, you should know that I don't want bad for the ummah. When it comes to someone question you about what happened in Algeria, there's certain Algerians that'll be like, huh? How can you say that? And just smack him in the face, right? But at the same time, I could see that person has concern over the lives that were lost, you know. and the sanctity of the believer and the husn al-dhan I have for that person is that, as
Mm.
opposed
Yeah.
to, I'm not going to say, oh, you're a coward, how could you, blah, blah, blah. I can have husn al-dhan. And I think that's where it all goes back down to. If we can have husn al-dhan for each other, we can go so far, because we can then, نتعاون على البر والتقوى in that regards. We can actually help each other get to where we need to go without this threat of like, oh, are you my enemy, or do you want what's good for me? You're trying to tear me down. Like, I'm on this path for the sake of Allah. Are you on the path for the sake of Allah? You don't have to be on my path, but you're on a path that you think is for the sake of Allah. May
Mm.
Allah guide us both to what's best.
Yeah.
It's
George
important.
Bush, not George Bush style.
Whoa. You're going to have to clarify what you mean there.
George Bush, he said, you're either with us or you're against us.
Oh, right. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. Yeah. Who died recently? Jimmy Carter died yesterday. Or the day
Don't know
before.
much about the dude.
And I saw some people cheering, but I guess he's a bad guy.
I've been seeing so many videos of people dying, bro. It's just crazy. And I just think about, wow, like their book of deeds is sealed. Like, damn, that's intimidating.
Yeah. And the responsibilities that we keep accruing. People that demand more and more responsibility, they just end up being more questioned about. Whether that's wealth or whether that's children or whether that's certain positions of power, employment, or whatever it might be. Scary stuff, man. And then you've got the aspect of like, if you don't do anything, you could be questioned about your apathy and you're not engaging.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Life's not a game, bro.
It's not.
It might seem like a game if you're not, you're not clued up, but it's not a game at all. You think like me, Annie. I think life's, I'm just, I don't know, I'm just stacking up the material, and I'm just like, oh yeah, no, I'll get a car. Okay, that'll be good. Okay, yeah, this, okay. But that's just all against me. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Unless I use it right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Let alone everything we start talking about, bro. Oh, that's the worst of it.
I mean,
200, 300 podcast
bro.
episodes.
I tried to be careful, bro. I don't think maybe that's the problem with the podcast. Most of my strongest held opinions, they're either not controversial anyway, or they're too controversial to even say on a podcast. So
I think I've grown to be a lot more cautious in some respects, should I say. Because of this element, because like, look, we can say a lot of things and we can have opinions, and I've grown to see people speak like how I spoke when I was 14, and I'm like, ooh, they'll learn
I think
one
this
day.
is basic, to be honest, bro. I don't think this is revolutionary. I think like if you just look at like, I don't know, 40 hadith of Nawawi, you're gonna be like, damn, I better shut my mouth. Like, isn't it? Like, really and truly.
Yeah, but interpret that as, no, I need to speak more because what I have is the haqq. Everyone needs to hear it. There's that element. People don't grow out of that. People don't, certain.
The only way you could not grow out of that is if whatever Allah just didn't give you the tawfiq for it, or you didn't keep learning over time. You just stayed in your bubble and you didn't expand your knowledge or something. For me, that's all I could imagine.
I think it's just not accruing any real world responsibility.
I think that's what it is. As well. Yeah, like experience and
And even if you may have accrued responsibility, even if it's a wife and kids, but you've just lacked any real kind of care and attention to them. You haven't got this like protection element or this kind of thought of a community or community building, family building, generational kind of steps forward. You think, yeah, it's fine. Let's carry on this path of fire. Allahu alam. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is quite vague, but I think people get the general concept.
Inshallah, bro. Okay, let us know what you thought. Let us know your side of the story. If we got something, maybe we are like talking about being a bit more mature and self-aware, and we're actually level 2 out of 10, and you guys are level 3 or 4, 5 out of 10. You need to put us in our place. It's all welcome, inshallah. And we'll see you next time, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, shadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Assalamu alaikum.